Today in Luther's Kitchen, we're making pita bread. And to start this pita bread recipe, we're going to make a sponge. So we're only going to use about half of the flour, or in this case, 1 cup. And to that, we're adding 1 cup of warm water, about 100 degrees. And we're going to stir that and add in our yeast. We're going to let that hang out for about 15 minutes until the mixture is bubbling. 15 minutes later, you can see those large bubbles, which is a good thing because it means the yeast is activated. So now I'm going to start to drop in the rest of the ingredients. I use almost 2.5 cups of flour in this recipe, but I don't want to put it in at the same time. And I'm using a mix of flour because I like to put a little whole wheat flour in this bread recipe. So that's about 1/2 cup of whole wheat flour, and I put another 1/2 cup of all-purpose flour, a teaspoon of salt, and about a tablespoon of olive oil. Later on, I do put in a little pinch of sugar as well. So you want to give this a good stir. You want to let that knead for about 4 to 5 minutes, and then you can check the consistency to see if your dough is too loose and you need to continue to add a little more flour. So after 4 minutes, I can tell the dough is still super sticky, so I'm going to add in most of that flour just so that I can get a tacky dough but not a sticky dough. Another few minutes have passed, and again I'm just checking the consistency of that dough, and it still is pretty wet. I want most of it to pull away from the side of the bowl, so I am going to add the rest of the flour. So this is about 2.5 cups total that I'm using, and I'm going to let that roll until the dough pulls away from the side of the bowl. Now you can see that the dough is pulled away from the side and it's attached itself to that dough hook. I'm going to gather the dough, I'm going to smooth it out on the counter. I want to make a nice smooth ball. The dough should be tacky, which means when I push my finger in it, it should give back and it should leave a little bit of dough on the surface of my finger. So smooth it out on a clean surface, and then use that same bowl. You don't even need to wash it. Put about a teaspoon of oil in it. Slather it around with your hand. You don't want the dough to stick to the bowl. Then you're going to put the dough in and roll the dough around so that the top part gets oiled. You're going to wrap it tightly in plastic wrap and set that aside for 2 hours or until it's doubled in size. Now it's time to punch down the dough, release the air, roll it out into a log, cut that in half. Cut each half in half, and cut each of those halves in half. So you get 8 equal sections. I'm going to sprinkle a little bit of whole wheat flour on this sheet pan. I'm using the whole wheat flour because it's a little more gritty than the all-purpose, and I don't want my balls of dough to stick while they're doing their second rest or rise. And then I'm going to take each of those sections of dough and just using my hand and the pressure of my hand on a clean counter with no additional flour, I'm just rolling it around to create smooth balls. I'm going to take a little bit of olive oil and rub the tops of each of those balls lightly with oil just so these don't stick to the top of the plastic wrap as these sit at the counter and rest for another 30 minutes. Again, you want them to double in size. Now's a good time to preheat your oven to 500 degrees, and if you have a stone, like a pizza stone or a baking stone, put it on the bottom rack and remove the other 2 racks out of your way. I'm rolling this out so that I don't have to use a lot of flour. I'm just going to put a little bit on the pizza peel so that the flat disc comes off easily, and you want to make sure this is super thin, like less than 1/4 inch if possible. And I'm going to slide it onto a super hot stone. This will puff up within 2 minutes. It's pretty cool to watch. And then carefully, you want to get in there and you want to flip it over to the other side to slightly brown it. Another 1.5 minutes, 2 minutes max. Then you can pull that out carefully with your pizza peel. And then once you let that cool, you should be able to open and see how the pockets have been made. So this is a perfect pita pocket. Alternatively, you could heat a skillet or a cast iron pan really hot and then lower it to medium high. Don't put anything in the pan. Again, roll your disc out 1/4 of an inch thick and then just watch it work its magic. It may take a couple minutes on the first side for you to see some bubbles, but you'll start to see some bubbles, and you can use an offset spatula to kind of press them down, but you don't want to break the holes, because if you puncture the holes, then you will not get the dough to separate to create the pocket. So you just give light pressure so you can kind of move the air around so that it puffs up on both sides. Then you want to flip it, cook the other side for another minute or two. And once both sides are lightly brown, and again, don't poke holes in the puff up part, otherwise all the air comes out and it won't continue to separate. But you'll see here pretty soon I get one great loaf that puffs up beautifully right there. And then flip it over. You want to lightly cook the other side. Repeat this process with the remaining discs that you have rolled out. For this recipe and more, visit myclasscancook.com.